everyone, I'm Izzy at Minerva. In today's pattern drafting series, we're going to continue looking at how to create openings on our garment at the front. Now obviously these little openings can then be applied to all sorts of different bodice alterations to create a beautiful and unique top. In this one, we're going to look, instead of just creating buttons straight down the centre front, we are going to look at how to create some enclosed buttons and only to the top section of the bodice as shown in the little image next to me. We are going to use buttons and put those into the top, into the placket at the front. However, you could use a zip or ties, all sorts of different ways of kind of closing that bit up together. As ever, you're going to need your standard pattern drafting tools, which are listed next to me here. And we're going to start off just with our standard block, and then we're going to do a little bit of dart manipulation, moving things around a bit before we then actually look at how to create that opening. As always, we love to hear from you, so before we start, let's just say feel free to pop your comments below the video. We always love to hear from you and also would love to see your version of what we're creating today. So please do share that with the maker community on your socials or on the Minerva or website by creating a free account. Brilliant. So in front of me here, I've got my 2 copies of my front bodice. Now we're going to make different alterations to these 2 bodices. So let's just mark on here that this is going to be the right side of the garment when we wear it, which means the right side is facing up, and this will be the corresponding left side. So our button holes always go on this side and our buttons are going to go on our left side. And that's how we usually work with the women's block, with the buttons on that way round. Obviously it's up to you how you want to draft your buttons. It's completely up to you, so make it up as you go along. You can follow the instructions and flip them over if you would prefer. To start off with, we're going to rotate this dart across to the side seam just to remove it out of the way of up here, as we've got quite a lot of bits and bobs to be doing up there. Mark a point 6 centimetres down from the arm side on both pattern pieces. Obviously what you do to one side, you would want to repeat to the other side. Draw a line from that point up to the apex. Cut along that line and then also cut out the volume from the bust dart at the top. Remove the volume from both of those bodice pieces and just rotate the darts so that it opens up at this side seam instead. Find the centre of the base of the dart, then mark a point 2 centimetres away from the apex. Locate your ruler so that it's touching the apex and also the centre of the dart, and then just draw the centre line of the dart up to that 2 centimetre offset line, and then draw in the legs of your dart. Let's grab a piece of paper and just put that underneath our bodice blocks so we can add volume in between the 2. The first thing we're going to do to the right bodice is to add a button stand. So we are going to draw a line 1.5 centimetres offset from the centre front. Now we're going to continue to draw in along the other side until we get just below the apex, and then we want to find a nice smooth circle just to finish off that curve. You can pop that wherever you want. The depth of it is completely up to you, but obviously just bear in mind that your head needs to be able to pop through the top once you've sewn it all together. We're now going to add an extension to the front edge, which is 2.5 centimetres wider than this stitch line here. So for us, that's going to be 5.5 centimetres. And then square that off. Mark a notch along this area, which reflects where the centre line will be once that facing is folded under. So for us, mark a notch along here at 1.5 centimetres. And just repeat that at the bottom. Next, we're going to add our 5 centimetre facing all the way around the neckline. On the left bodice, we are going to draw in our button stand at 1.5 centimetres as normal. Add your facing line at 5 centimetres, offset from around the neckline. I'm going to mark another little notch, 1.5 centimetres away from the side edge of this extension. and then draw a dashed line down here. This will effectively be where your button holes are going to go. Use your extending gauge to determine where your buttons need to go, or just mark out some equidistances using your ruler. Continue those lines across until they hit the center front of your left bodice. So you've got your buttonholes in the same place across both pattern pieces. Okay, we're going to start off by tracing over our left bodice. 1.5 centimetre seam allowance to the shoulder seam. Draw in your arm side. Add your seam allowance to the side seam. Draw in your dart, making sure that your dart legs are only extending 2 centimetres away from the apex. We're going to ignore the waist dart at this point because we want to be able to put the top on over our shoulders. So we're going to ignore that for now, but we're going to extend out this way and add our 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. And then just draw a nice round curve for your seam allowance to the neckline. Add your notches to your centre front and mark in where your buttons are going to go. Annotate your pattern piece. Placket front, left bodice, cut 1 with right side up. Brilliant. Let's do our left facing pattern piece now. Placket front, left bodice facing, cut 1 with wrong side up. Now the reason we want 1 with the wrong side up is actually because we effectively are going to have it tucked under and reflected underneath there. Okay, let's move on to our right bodice now and add our seam allowances as we need to. While we're doing our facings, let's trace around our right side facing. Make sure to add the notches to your facing pattern piece as well. Placket front, right side facing, cut 1 with wrong side up. Draw in your stitch line as well, which is this bit here. This is going to be critical for you to mark on your pattern piece as well when you come to cut it out of your fabric. Placket front, right front bodice, cut 1 with right side up. Fantastic. Now we've done all the hard work on the front. The back is very similar to what we've done in the past. So let's just crack on and do that nice and quick. First, we're just going to mark a 5 centimetre offset all the way around the neckline in order that we've got a facing line that we can use. The other thing we're going to note with this pattern piece is that we do not want the darts because we want to give that volume into the top so we can pull it over our shoulders. And then we also just want to draw a straight line from the arm side all the way down to the waist and extend that waistline along. What that's doing is just giving us extra ease across the whole of the waistline, and so we can definitely get it on over the top. You may well find as you play about with your block that you don't need to add this extra little bit in. You may find that when you remove the waist dart, that's absolutely sufficient because you've probably done the same on the front. Perfect. Let's grab some tracing paper and then we'll just trace over the facing to start off with. So we're saying this is the back bodice facing. We're going to cut 1 on the fold. The grain line is just going to follow the centre back. We've added seam allowances to the neckline and the shoulder seam as they're going to be attaching onto other bits. Perfect. Now we'll just do the same again for the back bodice, full bodice pattern piece. This is our back bodice. We're just going to cut 1 on the fold. We've added a seam allowance to the neck and to the shoulder and the side seams, which are the bits that are going to attach onto the front. Excellent. So time to cut out your fabric if you are following along at home, and then come back and join me and we'll sew it up together and then see what it looks like. First thing we're going to do is to sew the darts on across all pattern pieces. If you're not sure how to do that, just refer back to video 22. Lovely. With the back darts, press them towards the side, and with the front darts, just press them down towards the waist. Next, we're going to lay the front pattern pieces over the back with right sides together and just pin them at the shoulder seams. Just do that for both shoulder seams. And then sew using your 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Just press those seams open. Now, effectively, we want to sew together our facing. I know that my fabric is just calico, so it looks the same on both sides. So I've got the right side facing up on the screen here for my back bodice, for the facing of the back bodice. And underneath this one, I've got the right side facing up of my right front facing. Do you remember, because we cut it with the wrong side facing up, so the wrong side is on this side. Likewise on this side, I've got the right side of my left bodice facing up. So I've got the right sides facing up all the way around. I'm then going to flip this over, and with right sides together, I'm just going to pin the facing together along the shoulder seams. Sew those together now. Let's just go and press those seams open. Great. Okay, so let's get our facing and just place it on top of our bodice with the right sides together. Just line it up really nice and neatly. Next, we're just going to pin that in place. Make sure that you are aligning your shoulder seams nice and neatly, and also any notches along the way. Okay, we're going to sew from the bottom of the waist there all the way around the neckline and continue on to the end at that point. Excellent. So we've sewn all the way from there, all the way around, and stopped at that point. Okay, so at this point we've got our bodice the right side of the garment as we wear it on the ironing board, and we're just going to open up that big bit of facing so that they are like that. The right side of the fabric is facing up for both sections. Now we're going to flip it over, so the wrong side is facing up now. Using your friction pen or some chalk, mark a point that is 7 centimetres away from your from your raw edge. Bring this fabric over until it hits that 7 centimetre mark, and just iron, and then just iron in place. We're then going to fold it over one more time at that point. Now, what you should notice is that your little notch down here, which is your centre front notch, is now lining up with the notch there. So that raw edge should be folded right and touching that notch at both ends. Just press that in place. Next, with the wrong side of the facing together, we're just going to fold the facing back over and into the bodice. And effectively, we're just going to turn the facing so that it is turned into the inside all the way around, and press it in place around the neckline. You may want to just snip out any of the tension as you go around the curve of the neckline. Lovely. Okay, so we've got a beautiful placket about to happen here. It's looking really nice on the inside. We don't want the buttonholes to be on the right side, but actually we want them to be underneath. So if you just open that pattern piece out, and then grab your pattern piece and just mark on where your buttonholes should be going. So my buttons are about 1 centimetre long, 1.2 centimetres, so I'm just going to draw a line exactly where I want those buttonholes to go. Next, grab your buttonhole foot and pop your button into the back of it. Your machine may well have a different type of foot to mine, but make sure you've read your instructions so that you know how to sew buttonholes using your own machine. And then just sew those 3 buttonholes. Lovely. Once you've created those nice buttonholes and they're on either side of the facing, just going to create those buttonholes now, create the gaps between the buttonholes. And you can do this in a number of ways. I'm just going to use a pin, pop it at the top of my buttonhole, and then use my unpicker just to open up that gap. The reason why we do this at this point is because it gets much harder to access these buttonholes once we've sewn everything together. Brilliant. So now we've got these little buttonholes, which are looking really cute. They're going to line up with the buttonholes that we've got, the buttons that we've got marked there. But what we now need to do is just finish off the centre front along this bit. It's not actually the centre front, it is finish off the bit where the fronts are going to match up. So the first thing that I want us to do is actually to attach the facing to the main bit of the right hand side of the garment, and so we're just going to open that up and take a little look at that bit to start off with. So effectively we're just going to put right sides together for that section, and I'm just going to open up that seam allowance as far as I can and just pin those together. You may just have to push some of those buttonholes. Just pin that little bit away so that you've got that marker point at the bottom of your stitch line. So basically you want to be sewing all the way from your stitch line, the bottom of your stitch line there, all the way down to the waist seam. So I've just popped a pin in there at that point, and there's quite a lot of, you know, fabric in that area. So just take it nice and slow and steady and get it nice and accurate. Just using a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Okay, so we want to join up the top so that it's attached at this point and then loose at this point to allow our head to come through it. So line that up really nicely so it's all good and neat. And then pop one hand underneath and just hold it in place along the seam allowance and then flip that open. Next, I want you just to pin that in place all the way from the stitch line up here, all the way down through all those layers of fabric. So we've also pinned through the facing on the other side, on the left side of the garment. Now we're just going to sew a line of stitches to the right of your line of stitches you've just done, so that we are then sewing this part to that part. Just offset it by about 1 millimetre, get it as close as you can. Okay, so if you then just open that up, you've then got that beautifully sewn together and an opening at the top. The only final thing we need to do now is actually just to sew the stitch line all the way down the front. Use your pattern piece if you need to, just to mark where the stitch line needs to go again. Mark that on, and then just for the sake of accuracy, I'm just going to pop a couple of pins in place so that we don't get any weird gathers or folds where I don't want them. Now, just sewing through this top layer up here, we're now just going to sew all the way along there. Great, so that's all done now. We're just going to sew the side seams together now. So with right sides together, just pin your side seams in place and then sew them using your 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Press those seam allowances open. The only thing left to do now is just to sew on our buttons. So let's do that now. Now don't forget that we are just testing this for fit and just showing you some basics of pattern drafting. Obviously you might want to interface where your buttons are going, your buttonholes on your final garment, depending on the weight of your fabric, and also you'll probably want to finish the inside edge of your facing as well. So we've just left that raw in this video because we're not doing like a final garment. But you could overlock that or just fold it under nice and neat all the way around. You could also finish it with some lovely bias binding if you would prefer. Lovely, so there we go. Well, we have done our 3 buttons and let's go and try that on. So here we go, the final version of our placket top. This can also be referred to as a fly front. What it does is it just really elegantly hides those buttons so that you can't see them from the front, and just creates a really subtle opening. There's quite a few nice little techniques in that, aren't there? I really enjoyed doing that. Really interesting, kind of the process of drawing it out and then sewing it up together. A bit of a mind tease, I guess, at some points, because you're kind of double guessing yourself how it folds back in on itself as you're pattern drafting. So a great process to follow and learn from. So thanks for joining me today. I've been Izzy at Minerva, and I will see you next week for further pattern drafting tutorials.